Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. How did you first react when you saw how many French-themed cafes Seoul has, from the Paris Baguette to the Jours to the, what's the other one? Ciel de France. What was that like when you first saw that in Seoul?
Well, I mean, it wasn't for me the first time because I was here in Korea on and off, growing up as a little kid as well. My father is Korean and my mom is French. So I also lived in Seoul when I was a little kid. So I was always used to, both cultures, and coming here in Korea, it's a funny feeling, to see these big names, sometimes in good French or grammatically correct French, sometimes misspelled. But I think it's kind of funny, and I don't dislike it. It makes me feel maybe in some ways a little bit more at home. And I like to play and to juggle around with both cultures. I'm always also happy to see Korean restaurants when I'm in Paris.
Oh, yeah? How are they? Are they good?
Some are good. Some are not that good. You have a wide range. But the Korean community in France is also growing, and the French community in Korea is also growing. So, I think things are working in a good direction.
And it's a man with a foot in both cultures, a foot in each culture I'm talking to today on Notebook on Cities and Culture here in the Arirang building. It is Adrien Lee. He is a host on Arirang TV and Arirang Radio, Showbiz Korea, and Catch the Wave. Tell me, it seems like before you started doing this, it would have been unlikely that somebody who had a background in more cultures than Korea would be put up as someone to distribute Korean culture, to make Korean culture known to the world. It makes sense now when you think about it, but it seems like it would have been unlikely when you started that somebody who wasn't only like fully no place else but Korean. You know what I mean?
Yes, and it's also funny because of my educational background. My major wasn't broadcasting or journalism. My major was industrial engineering, so really nothing to do with TV or radio. And I just, after graduating from my master's degree, I decided to come here because I wanted to kind of rebalance the scale between France and Korea. I had lived maybe more years in France, and I had more friends in France as well, but I really loved Korean culture, so I always had in my mind after I finished my studies, I'm going to come live in Seoul, and I'm going to try to work here and to maybe start a new chapter in this country. So I came here in 2007 as an exchange student. I finished my master's degree in 2008, and I arrived here in 2008. And a few months after arriving, I had the opportunity to audition for a job as a TV host here. And I didn't really know what it was going to be like. So it was more out of curiosity that I came here. And I was really surprised, but they offered me a job. So I said, well, I just finished my studies and I'm willing to try anything. So I just jumped on the train, and we've been rolling for about 6 years now, 7 years. So I started off with TV with, as you said, a program called Showbiz Korea, where I introduce Korean entertainment news, pretty much around the Korean wave and Hallyu and all the stars, the highlight and all that. And then radio came a bit later, about 4 years ago, and I started with a program called Grooving with Adrien, which was more music oriented. And this program I'm running, Catch the Wave, is fully focused on Korean culture. So we have different segments, and we talk about Korean culture, the Korean wave, and we play Korean music. And I've been doing that program for about 3 years now. So it's been a great journey for me, and I'm very thankful, and I'm really happy to be able to promote, as you said, promote and distribute Korean culture. I try to be some kind of bridge between Korea and also the rest of the world. And it's fantastic, to have the feedback you receive on the message board, via radio, but also via TV. And you've probably been interviewing many people here, and they probably all noted the fact that more and more people are coming to Korea. Korea is becoming more known outside now. So, and I'm trying to do my little piece here and trying to add my piece to the big puzzle. So it's been great, and I think life is pretty unpredictable.
Did you think you were going to do industrial engineering work in Korea when you came?
Well, I actually did a 6-month internship before graduating from my master's degree. But I didn't see myself working in a company here in Korea. I didn't find it all that exciting. And once you start, it's hard to get out. You know what I mean, right?
You're locked in. Yeah. You're going up and up and up and following orders.
Sure. So I told myself I'm going to just take 1 or 2 years to try things that have nothing to do with my major. And I'm going to try to grow my network of people here in Korea. And I just happened to have the chance to work here. So that's how it started. And I'm really happy about it. I don't think I'll be able to go back to industrial engineering anytime soon.
No more desire?
Yeah, I think it's once you tasted broadcasting and the kind of life I have. So I'm a freelance. Right. And I get to basically, work on my schedule, and I set the boundaries and everything.
Right. I know what you mean. Once you get used to it, you really think, I think I've been away too long from the regular office world. I wouldn't be compatible with it anymore.
Yeah. You have more freedom over here. Of course, you have to work hard as well, and it's different hours, but it's a more flexible lifestyle, I would say. And as a half Korean, half French host, I have also many opportunities here in Korea, and I would say more than in France. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I want to stay. I'm also really looking forward to many things, not only this year, but in the years to come. We have the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games coming up. So a lot of big events taking place here in Korea. And it's fantastic. I'm really thankful.
Growing up in France, how much Korean culture was around you? Was it just in your house? Was there any presence? Was there a Korean presence anywhere that you noticed outside of your own home?
Well, of course, at home, my dad, being Korean, we always spoke in Korean to him. When he first arrived in France, he didn't speak French and he didn't speak English very well. So the main language I used with him was Korean. And outside of our home, we also had some of his friends, Korean friends, but I went to a French school. So at school, I had no Korean friends. I was just brought up in a French environment. So my parents insisted on, I have a younger sister, so my sister and I, learning Korean language. So we had a tutor come once a week at home, and we would learn Korean, the basic things.
Sure.
So that actually helped a lot. And we also ate Korean at home because my dad loves kimchi, of course.
What were some family meals you really liked that they were like regular Korean foods?
Oh, at home? When we were kids, one of the very basic things we had is just rice. You add some sesame oil, and then you add an egg yolk, and then some what'd you call? Kikkoman sauce.
Yes, soy sauce.
Soy sauce. There you go. I was looking for the word. And you just mix the whole thing, and then you just wrap it into seaweed like kim.
Right.
And then you just have some kimchi on the side. Those were very basic things we had at home. And then we had like different side dishes, panchans, and then, meat or fish or... but I love Korean food. And even today, if you ask me what would you like to eat, then I'll probably say something like hanshik or hanjeongshik. Yes. Hanjeongshik is like the more traditional... Yeah. So I'll probably go for that more than a French restaurant.
Oh, really?
Here in Korea.
Was being Korean always something to be proud of for you, or was it not something you were even aware of until later? Like, oh, I guess most people in France aren't part Korean.
Yeah, I guess no. I've always been very proud of my roots, and I grew up in a setting where I wasn't a victim of racism or anything like that. So I was very lucky, and my parents were also very supportive. Right. So I was always very proud of my roots.
Is there much French racism against East Asians? That seems like that's not the direction that it takes in Paris.
Yeah, not so much. Yes, it's true. Yeah, less racism, I would say, towards Asians. Maybe a bit more towards people from Africa or maybe Arab countries.
Where the history is more complicated between the countries.
Sure. And Asians in France are maybe like in many places around the world, they work hard. They're more discreet. They usually cause less trouble. Not that, everyone causes trouble, but it's, preconceptions people have.
Yes.
But for me, I also had the advantage of having a French mother.
Yes.
So I wasn't fully Asian, and I had, deep French roots as well. My grandparents are French. I have French cousins as well. Most of my friends were French, and I didn't really hang around the Asian community that much. So I was really well, I guess, inserted into the French culture. So I really didn't have any problems with my background being half Asian, half European, or being a Eurasian, as they say, right?
Sure.
I didn't have any of that. And I grew up in Paris, and Paris is a very big city, right? So you have a mix of cultures, just like, maybe New York or Los Angeles all the big cities. So for me, it wasn't a big problem. And I always was very proud. And I always knew, especially when I started getting into university, that it was a big advantage that I had. You don't know it when you're a kid in middle school or elementary school. And sometimes it's more of a problem even for most cases, because you have this identity crisis in a way. Am I French? Am I Korean? Who am I?
And in France, people probably regarded you as Korean. And in Korea, they might have regarded you as a Frenchman, like a lot of people. Yeah.
So you're kind of like sitting between two chairs, and it's kind of uncomfortable. But once you grow and you start studying and, learning about what real life is about, looking for job opportunities, meeting people, then you notice that it's a big advantage, especially today, globalization.
You learn how to use it.
Yeah. So right now I'm really thankful. And I know for my parents, it wasn't easy for them. Because of, the cultural differences between France and Korea. For my dad, he had to make many sacrifices when he decided to leave Korea and go to France as well. But I'm really thankful, and I think my parents have no regrets now.
So did your mom already speak Korean?
Yeah, see, the thing, my mom majored in Asian studies. Yeah. So she lived in Korea. She also, before meeting my dad here in Korea, she also lived in Japan. So she was quite aware of Asian culture, and she was very open-minded. She traveled a lot, so she loved Korea, and that's why she decided to come here. She was studying here. She was also teaching here at the university, and she met my dad at Yonsei University, which is one of the big universities here in Seoul. And at the time, my mom was a professor, my dad was a student, and he was a tennis player, actually. So she met him on the courts, and she actually was taught by my father. So my father basically taught her how to play tennis, and that's how the love story began.
Ah, yes. You mentioned, speaking of cultural exchange, the Korean restaurants now available and open in Paris. And it seems here, we alluded to this at the beginning, a lot of Koreans seem to have a strong interest in French culture, or like it's like I don't know how to describe it, but they have a sort of dream of French culture, don't they? What is that?
Yeah, it's true. Well, France has a really positive image when it comes to culture, long history. They have a big cultural heritage, and they know how to put it forward as well, and they know how to promote it and to conserve it. And Korean people have this fantasy about Europe and about Paris, and all Korean girls want to go there, visit big famous places, but also do some shopping maybe.
It's a style capital to this day, of course.
Fashion, the looks, and that Korean people are really into appearance.
Right.
So Paris has all of that. And, girls, I talked to some of my Korean friends here, and they have good food, good shopping places, many museums. So, I mean, if you go to Paris, you can basically meet all your expectations. and that's why a lot of people love France. And I think this fascination has been going on for many decades now, and it continues. And as you mentioned, here in Korea, you also have many restaurants using French names, bakeries using French names. It's all about that image that France gives. And, Korea has been mostly influenced by America in, the 60s, 70s, 80s, even up to the 90s. But after, I would say, the 2000s, Europe started to have a bigger influence. And I think now Koreans are intaking more of what Europe has to offer, including France as well. So, yeah. That's my take on it, and for me, it's a positive thing, being half French, half Korean.
Right, that Korea is globalizing in its interests.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fascinating time in history, and for Korea, things are changing a lot. And Korea after the Korean War was very busy rebuilding the country and growing on the economical level. But now they're also putting a lot of emphasis on culture, and the country is trying to brand its image in a more cultural way, with the Korean wave, with hanshik or Korean food, with Korean language as well. So it's the whole package, and I think for me, I have my place here, and there is a lot to do. So that's why I'm here. Maybe it's a strategic decision, but it's also a beautiful place. And I love Seoul. It's a very safe, convenient, and dynamic place to live. So I think I'll be here for several more years.
We can think of many differences between Seoul and Paris that are obvious, but what's a big difference between Seoul and Paris that has only become apparent to you over time? Ways that over time the cities seem very different to you, not necessarily in like one's good in this way, one's bad in this way, but how have they seemed more different to you as you spend more time here?
Well, as I said, Korea is a very dynamic place. So just to give you one example, if I go back to Paris today, and I go back to where I grew up, most of the restaurants and most of the shops will still be there, exactly like they were maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But here in Korea, if you come here maybe after a year or 2 years, maybe you won't notice the same restaurants or places. Like, I don't recognize this place, but I was here a year ago.
Right. Never in Paris would that happen.
And that not as much as here. And some neighborhoods here completely change in a matter of years. France is more stable in that sense, and you'll find that same restaurant or that same coffee shop you used to go to a few years ago, or even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So it's not that one thing is better than the other. It's just different cultures, different ways to live. I've also had some people describing France as a very boring heaven. It's a boring
Korean
heaven.
people describe it as that?
No, just general people who have traveled around the world and who know France and Korea. They've told me, and I found it really funny, saying that Paris is a boring heaven and Korea is an exciting hell. So,
yes, I've heard similar sentiments about American offices versus Korean offices. American offices are pleasant but boring. Korean offices are hellish but I guess exciting. I don't know. It's hard to imagine.
Well, you get hooked and you get addicted to that energy and, those business dinners and just being with Korean people. Korean people are very welcoming. They're very warm-hearted, I would say. And once you get to know them, they're really loyal and they really try to help you. They're not as individualistic, maybe. French people they're very, I do my thing and then you do your thing. We don't have to do it together. But here in Korea, it's a lot about, communities and group work, making teams. So it's a different culture, but once you get used to it and once you accept it, I think it's hard to leave.
Right.
And I've met many people who were maybe living here for 2-3 years, expatriates, or maybe even people who came to teach English, who really fell in love and then they went back to their hometown, their home country, and then they missed Korea so much that they decided to come again, So
they got hooked.
It's like a reverse culture shock, things like that.
When you're in these conversations, I mean, do you get asked, were you, when you first got here, asked by Korean people to explain all sorts of things about France? Because that's where you had come from. Did people have a lot of questions for you about where you were from? And do you feel Korean? Do you feel French?
Yeah.
I can imagine that here.
Well, the most common question I've had was, do you like France or Korea more?
Oh, that
an
impossible question to answer.
It's like, do you like your dad or your mom more? Hard to say. I grew up in both countries. I was born in Korea, raised in France. Now I live here. I really am proud of my roots, and I can't say I like one place more. It's just that now I'm happy with my life in Korea, and I think I have more things to do here. But that doesn't mean I will never work in France, It's just the current chapter of my life is taking place here in Korea. But yeah, Korean people often ask me questions. So what's your favorite Korean food? What do you like the most about France? So what about French people? Do you like French girls or Korean girls more? Things like that.
I imagine you have strategies now to avoid those questions or to address them, to just get rid of that subject.
Well, now my friends don't ask me these questions anymore. It's just people sometimes here and there, but no, I'm always happy to share. And as I said, I'm here to share cultures. So when people are interested, I always try to take time and we try to talk a little bit. And it's also very interesting to talk with people who maybe just like you have traveled a lot, who've seen many things, who've met various people from different horizons. It's always exciting, and I think we get to share, and it's a fascinating interaction, I would say.
Now, listeners will notice that you speak English like a native speaker. Did you live in an English-speaking country?
Yeah, it's true. French people don't speak English that well, do they?
Well, I don't know. I actually haven't been to France.
Oh, yeah?
So I don't know. I mean, what I hear about France is not that they don't speak English well, but that they so prefer French that they,
That's true.
why would they speak English? That
They would
whole
have
thing.
a strong French accent.
I guess so. I think
Maybe.
you get the sense like English, they think English is fine, but the only problem is it's not French enough. So that's, that whole thing.
And speaking English with a French accent, I think, is also quite popular. Girls, I think, like it in some places.
Yes,
but for me, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because I actually lived in Korea when I was a little kid for about 4 years. My mom used to work for the French embassy here in Seoul. And so I was lucky to go to an international school here in Seoul. So I learned most of my English as a kid in elementary school. And then going back to France, I just, maintained it. And then I traveled, I studied abroad. So that's mostly where I got my English. And I love, meeting new people. I love traveling as well, learning about different cultures. So yeah.
You grew up with a sort of a mother language, a father language, and a school language in a way, all at once.
In a way, yeah. In a way.
Was it divided that way with setting to setting to setting? In one place you would speak one language, in one place another?
Well, at school, when I was living here in Korea and when I was going to that international school, of course, the main language we used was English. So in my mind, with my friends, it was all English. But then at home, I always spoke French with my mom because that was my mother tongue.
Yes.
And then
literally your mother tongue.
My mother tongue. And with my mom, with my dad, it was Korean because he didn't really speak any other languages very well, and he was just more comfortable with Korean. But, you know, since a baby, that's how it works. So I didn't really have like any confusion in my mind. That's just how it was set in my environment. Yeah. Some people say, you know, if you have a baby, it's not good to speak too many languages until like he's 5 or something like that, because the baby can get confused and then his mental growth or development is going to be, you know, hindered. I don't think it's really the case. If you give him a lot of love and if, you know, he doesn't have the confusion, if it's one language with one person and another language with this person, with another person, I don't think it's that confusing. But if the same person starts mixing languages, then I think problems can arise. For me, I didn't really have that. My dad was Korean, my mom was French, so I spoke French with my mom, Korean with my dad, and school was in English. So for me, it was kind of, you know, clear. Yeah.
The boundaries were clear. Do you study other languages as well, or are you done with that?
I don't right now.
You have enough languages, but...
Yeah, but I have studied more other languages. I studied German in school for about 5 years. I studied Spanish for 2 years, Chinese for about a year, but I don't speak, you know, it's just, it was just for school. But I think languages are fascinating. You get to meet new people and just, it's fun too. Just trying to speak, and trying to learn new expressions, just like you're learning Korean yourself, right?
Yeah. So that's, the language, at first Korean culture interested me, movies and whatnot, but through that, the language itself began interesting me. So it wasn't, people have different reasons for studying it, but I mean, when you meet somebody who's studying Korean, what's usually the reason? What do they tell you? Do they talk about why?
Yeah, here on my radio show called Catch the Wave at Arirang Radio, we have a segment where we teach Korean expressions with Hyunwoo Sun from Talk to Me in Korean.com.
Listeners will have heard him on the show.
Yeah. So we teach our listeners Korean expressions, and then they also sometimes record their voices talking in Korean, and then we air that, we correct them, and we try to help all these people. And they have various reasons. Some of them just fell in love with K-pop and they love Korean music. Maybe they even have a favorite group and they want to come to Korea one day. Some people love Korean dramas. They have favorite actors, or maybe just like you, they started watching Korean movies. Some people come here because they love Korean food, or maybe when they were growing up, they had a Korean friend and they just, you know, wanted to learn a new language. Some people just, you know, didn't want to go to Japan or China because it's just, you know, too many people already. So I'll just go to another country stuck between China and Japan.
Right. It's now very central, though. It's good logic now because it's literally centrally in Asia.
Sure. So, yeah, geographically speaking, it's pretty much at the center. So, I've heard various reasons. I've heard people start learning Korean because of Taekwondo.
Oh, yes.
You know, martial art. Also, people coming to Korea because of b-boying, you know, break dance.
Right, as Hyunwoo Sun also does.
I mean, Koreans are really good at that as well. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy. I also met once, I interviewed this guy, and he said he actually decided to come to Korea because, I mean, he was from, I think it was the UK or Ireland, and he just loved beer. But as a student, he didn't have any money. So the cheapest place to buy beer was Korea.
Fair enough.
Well, beer was really cheap, and he didn't want to go to Japan because life is quite expensive over there. Yes. So he just decided to come to Korea. Right. So, I mean, just really random reasons. But these days, I would say that the main reason is probably the Korean wave, K-pop, Korean dramas. That's one of the main drivers for people to learn Korean. And many people, and we also give this as an advice, to start learning Korean with what you like. So if you like Korean dramas, start trying to pick up words there, expressions there from scenes that you like. If you like Korean music, then just, look up your favorite artists, try to have some kind of translation of the lyrics and start learning like that. Try to repeat or sing after the music. So I think the most important thing if you want to start a new language is to have fun. So to enjoy it. And if you can, to also maybe meet people from that country and have some kind of exchange. Wow. That's going to be the easiest and the fastest way to do it. And these days, online, you can do so many things. Internet, you can meet people, you can exchange online, you can have some kind of language exchange, like you teach that person English and he teaches you Korean, things like that.
I must correct myself now. I said I'd never been to France. I did go for one day to Marseille.
See, but Marseille in the south of France.
Yes, exactly. But it didn't register because I hadn't studied any French, and I was sort of ashamed to go there because I was like, it didn't feel like a real visit because I hadn't studied the language. Do you have that same thing? It doesn't feel real to you unless you at least have studied a little bit of the language of a place you're going?
And I think it's true for basically any place around the world. Korea is a totally different experience if you speak a little bit of Korean. If you don't speak Korean, it's going to be hard for you to connect with Koreans and Korean culture. And I personally think that the most fun and exciting aspect of Korean culture is probably Korean people.
Yes.
People
they make the culture, after all.
It's true. But for France, I would say France more than French people.
Oh, really?
No, I may be exaggerating here. Maybe our French listeners are going to kill me.
There's something general about the culture you like that's all encompassing about France.
That's true. And for Korea, Korean people play a big part of, what Korean culture has to offer. So if you can interact with them and if you have a few Korean friends, they will show you what Korean culture is like. And you will have that, insider perspective. So that's really important and you will connect. So of course, if you're trying to come to Korea, before coming here, try to learn a few words, a few expressions, the basic things, and you'll have a more pleasant time. Of course.
When you're having conversations with friends in English then, or French or Korean, do you find you have a somewhat different personality in each language?
That's an interesting question. I think overall my personality is pretty much the same. But I guess there are maybe things that I wouldn't bring up when I speak with Koreans. And it wouldn't be a problem for me talking about it with French people or American people. So depending on the culture and the background, sometimes I'm more careful on certain issues. But that comes naturally because I know who I'm talking to and I know how they will react and I know how open-minded they can be. So it's just culture related. But it's true that I adapt my behavior and the way I talk to the audience or to the person I'm talking to.
That's your job.
Yeah, and that's very important actually. When you give a presentation or when you host a program, the more you know about the people you're talking to, the better it is, because you can match your communication style basically to them. And so you have more feedback and you have this, I guess, more intimate interaction with them. So that's very important. So it's the same when I'm talking on a personal level to Koreans, to Americans, or to French people. I usually kind of adapt to the person. But my personality overall isn't that different. I mean, I try to be very positive. I try to be a very optimistic person. I try to be open-minded and I try to be very natural, I guess. I don't like to put walls or I don't like to build, these stereotypes or images. And Koreans are a lot about your outer appearance, what car you drive, where you live, who you hang around with. I try not to focus on that too much. And
Are you exempt at all from it because you have a foreign background as well as a Korean background? Like they don't judge you as much for these things because of your being also from France?
Yeah, maybe they don't judge me as much, but maybe they also have more expectations because they think French people are like that, right? So I have to fit in that box. But I try not to. I try not to. And I try to have my own space and to redefine my identity as a half Korean and half French. We don't have many half French, half Koreans here in Korea. And
are there many in France that you've met?
Not really. I know a few. But I wouldn't say it's a big community. That's for sure.
There are very many on the west coast of America, in Los Angeles especially.
I'm sure. In France, much less. Much less. So, we have... we have these stereotypes, but I try to be myself, and I try to set my example. And if I've also met younger people who are, bicultural just like me, and if I can be some kind of role model for them, I'm always really happy. And if I can give them some good words of advice, I'm also always willing to do it. Some people have a hard time, as we said previously, growing up in a double culture environment. It's not easy. I think your parents have a big role to play, especially when you're young. Many of the kids I've met are really pretty much on one side. So let's say you're half American, half Korean. Well, you pretty much lived all your life in America and you don't know so much about Korea. Maybe you've been there once when you were a kid, so you remember your grandmother, your grandfather, but you don't speak Korean. You don't know so much about the culture. So for me, I was really lucky to have parents who really put a lot of emphasis on me having this double cultural background. So learning Korean, eating Korean food and French food at home, traveling. So, and I think that's very important. So if I, as a French Korean, can do my part and maybe try to give one example of what you can do as a half Korean, then I try to do that, Yeah.
What are some of the elements of new Korean culture, Korean wave culture that you enjoy the most yourself? If you can pick out things that you personally enjoy rather than things that you simply are very familiar with because you talk about them all the time, what end up being the elements of Korean culture you really take with you into your personal life as well?
Korean television, I think, is really funny. And what I liked as a kid, I always found French TV more boring than Korean TV.
Really? What was wrong with it?
I mean, it's not that it's wrong, but it's just, I don't know, I had this fascination about Korean variety shows, and they were just more crazy.
Do you seem more crazy?
And they are a bit more crazy, and you have more like special effects, and they do crazy things, and I just thought it was just more entertaining watching those. So I like watching Korean TV, but I'm not a big fan of Korean dramas. Maybe due to time, I don't have the time to watch like every episode every single week.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it. The people who are hardcore viewers.
Well, nowadays they have like video on demand and things like that, so that helps, of course. But the true fans, they really stick to the main broadcasting hours. So they go home early. They don't take any appointments during the airing, hours.
You have to be at work when this stuff is airing. How could you see it?
Yeah, I'm here, so I can't.
But you're sometimes talking about Korean dramas at work.
About it. So I kind of know what it is. It's just I don't have that really in-depth analysis on it, and my role here is not to be an expert. We have different guests coming in, and so I'm just trying to be some kind of bridge, as I said. And our listeners, they know much more than me, actually. They go online and they research. You meet people, and they just know more about Korean culture or more about a certain aspect of Korean culture because they're so passionate, and you can find so much information online. So I just try to be some kind of maybe transition, maybe link, maybe some kind of conveyor, maybe like so that's what I do. And in terms of Korean culture, what I really enjoy, music a lot. I think music, K-pop is very wide. Actually, you have different categories inside K-pop as well. But I think it's very catchy. I like the music videos as well. Koreans are really good at every visual aspect of the production. And they do a really good job in a very little time. So I like that. I love Korean food, of course.
Yes. I can't imagine who wouldn't like Korean food, though. I mean, to my mind, it's
Yeah.
one of the more delicious cuisines.
Oh, it's amazing, and it's cheap too.
Yeah, it's cheap,
if you could,
especially in Korea.
yeah, I wouldn't say it's cheap everywhere else, but
In Los
here
Angeles,
in
it's
Korea,
cheap. I live in Koreatown in Los
Yeah, then it's
Angeles, so
fine.
that's one of the reasons. But
I wouldn't
yes,
say it's cheap in Paris.
in Paris. This is what's fascinating to me, to try Korean food in various countries
Yeah.
and see how it's tailored to local tastes. How is it tailored in Paris to French tastes?
Well, I haven't been to that many, Korean restaurants in Paris. I think most of them try to stick to, the Koreanness. And they don't try to come up with fusion dishes. Here in Korea, you have a lot of fusion,
Right.
so they try to mix different styles of cuisine.
What's a French fusion dish like in Korea? Like I know they have a lot of Italian fusion restaurants, but is there also French food that's sort of that's mixed with the tastes of Koreans as well?
Trying to think. Well, what's for sure is that if you visit like a Korean bakery, the bakery may have a French name,
Yes.
but the things you find inside are somewhat, customized to the local market.
Right.
So there are things that that Koreans may think are French, but if you go to France, you'll never find those things, right?
What's a good example of something Koreans think is French?
Think it's French. Well, if you walk into any bakery, you'll find like these pizza breads type of stuff with
yes.
I don't know, they put cheese on it and they put so many things.
Things you wouldn't expect.
But yeah, but you'll never find that in a French bakery in France or when you buy pizza here, they put all these various toppings on, and you wouldn't find that in Italy. You wouldn't find that in France. Right. You stick more to traditional pizzas, but
they
here
don't put sweet potato inside the crust or anything like that.
No, yes, and they don't add bulgogi on top and pineapple and everything else and shrimps and
They're willing to try everything in Korea, though.
yeah, they're very creative in that sense, and they're trying to offer a wide range of things, which is not bad, but sometimes I think I'm more conservative on that issue.
I see what you mean. Other than the food, I mean, has the Korean wave, do you think, reached France in terms of if there's a lot of French fans of drama or movies or music? Do you hear from French people in response to your show, for example? Or what do you think, how far do you think it's made it to France, the Korean wave?
I think it's definitely growing. My mom used to be a Korean professor. She's French, but she used to be a Korean professor at a university in Paris, at a university there. And in the last few years, the number of students signing up for Korean class really started to skyrocket. So a lot of people are now interested in Korean language, Korean culture. Korean stars also now go to Paris for concerts. They had a big one, I think, a few years ago by SM Entertainment called SM Town Live in Paris. And so people are slowly getting to know Korean culture more. And for the Korean wave, it's still, a small community, and it's still a very young community as well. Mostly young female females.
Yes, that's what I noticed from Korean language classes that I take back in Los Angeles. When you start out, the classes are so big, and many of especially the women there, are there because of K-pop or K-drama, and they will name all their favorite actors or singers, right?
So it's pretty much the same thing in France, I would say. And then in France, maybe there's also this other aspect. You have a lot of Korean adoptees as well. Korean babies that were adopted by French families. Less now, but I guess in the 70s, 80s more. So you also have French people who just have Korean friends or people who are from Korea and they are, close to them. So they naturally start to ask more about the culture. They go to Korean restaurants, they hang out with Korean people, and they slowly start to learn the language. It's a natural, progressive process.
Now, you've learned a lot about Korean culture, obviously, doing the work you do. Have there been any surprising things you've learned about Korean culture, or what's popular in Korean culture, or what Korean culture produces lately? Things that have taken you by surprise, things you didn't expect that you have learned through doing the shows you do?
Anything new? Well, the main components of, the Korean culture wave are, as you said, music, so K-pop, and then you have K-dramas, movies. In Europe, a few Korean film directors have been famous for a long time, but I think now the movie industry is also more receptive to Korean films, so you have more Korean actors going to Hollywood. You also have more productions coming to Korea to film movies or to do some kind of collaboration with Korean companies. So I think, food, movies, languages, those three are probably going to grow a lot in the future. I'm trying to think a bit more in other terms. Maybe sports. Well, I mean, since you're from America, I know that many Korean women golfers are pretty good. I think in the top 100, you probably have about 40 Koreans.
Right. When you think of women's golf, you generally think of Koreans. I can't think of any non-Korean women golfers off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's crazy, actually. It's sometimes too
dominated
much.
The sport.
It's like, yeah. So, I mean, Koreans in that sense are really, once they decide to do something, they go all in.
Yes.
And they're really passionate and they really go to the end and they're willing to make a lot of sacrifices. And that's why they can be number one, maybe.
Right. Yeah. That's how they do it. Now, tell me, what have you learned about Seoul living here, about what sort of city this is, what sort of way is best to live here? Since you came to Seoul, what have you learned about just how best to live here?
Seoul is a very big city, so depending on what you like, the type of neighborhood you want to be in, you have, I guess, a wide range of options. And I think service-wise, it's a very convenient country, so you can order food at any time. Many places are open 24/7, so you really don't have to worry about opening or closing hours like in France, and you're like always looking at your watch, oh, I'm going to be late, it's going to be closed. And
oh, really? There's no midnight post, there's no 3 a.m. food in Paris?
Not so much. Not so much, I wouldn't say.
What are you usually eating when hungry at 3 a.m. here in Seoul?
Oh, in Korea, you can order food. I mean, you can order, chicken and beer, and you can order pizza
whatever you want.
Yeah, basically anything. Or you can just go to the convenience store around the corner, and it's probably going to be a 24-hour convenience store. So you just go in, buy whatever you like. You can buy instant noodles if you want, ramen. You can buy, I don't know, ice cream, whatever you like.
Yes.
Drinks. Many coffee shops are also open 24/7. So that's very convenient, I find. And on top of that, it's a very safe city.
Right.
And as a guy, I mean, I don't have many problems, but maybe more for the female audience. Living in a city that is safe, I think, is a big advantage, and you don't have to worry about, how to get home, when to get home.
Right.
You can take the subway here. You can take a cab. It's cheap, it's convenient, and it's safe.
How does that compare to Paris?
Paris, it depends on the neighborhoods, I would say. Depending on where you live, it's maybe not as safe for a girl to walk home alone, or even for a guy, even, you know. So, I mean, it's you don't even have to think about it here. And even if I have my smartphone or my laptop in a coffee shop, I'll just leave it on the table. I can go to the restroom and it will be there when I come back.
That's the real test of if you're in a place where there's not a crime issue. Can you get up to the bathroom, leave your laptop?
Sure. I mean, maybe you wouldn't be able to do that in Rome or in Paris. But here in Korea, it's pretty safe. You can leave your stuff. I can leave my bag here. I can leave my car keys. Something that also really surprised me is that here in Korea, you have, valet service everywhere. And you just give your key to a random guy you don't know. You don't even know if he really works for that restaurant or that coffee shop. But you just leave your keys in the car and then he just takes your car. And then
always brings it back, though.
And it always comes back as well. So that's something that also surprised me. So there's this sense of confidence and you trust other people.
Do you think other countries, be it France, anywhere else in Europe, anywhere, can learn elements of that? Can they learn and use sort of the Korean trust? Is that possible, or is there something a France can learn from a Korea?
Well, I guess you can always learn from another culture. I think in America, Obama wanted to use the Korean educational system as some kind of reference, and I wouldn't say it's maybe a good system. You have some pros and cons and things that you can take from. France, learning from Korea, not too sure actually. Maybe in that 빨리빨리 culture, like being quick response. French people are maybe sometimes slow on, they take their time and, you send an email, but you have a response maybe 2 days later. Especially during the summer.
It's not like it took the email 2 days to get there either.
No. So maybe in terms of that, speed, maybe that's something they can learn from. Koreans have this advantage because they're really quick and they want things to be done fast and also in a good way. Sometimes too fast, so the quality kind of, lacks.
Right.
So that's something Koreans can work on, trying to do things well and quickly.
It seems like the French overall are very concerned with quality in the things that are important to them.
They're willing to take more time and to pay more, as where Koreans want things to be quick. And that's the main priority, and that's why they change their phones all the time, and it's kind of too much sometimes.
So whenever you go back,
fast paced,
right? When you go back to Paris, everybody doesn't have a new cell phone. Then they maybe could have kept their own cell phone from the previous year.
Yeah, sure, and it's not a problem, and you're not going to look at them, strangely. It's just that person's decision, or But here in Korea, I don't know. It's just everyone follows the trend, and everyone goes in the same direction, and you have less, what shall I say, less, you have less people sticking out. And this is also true in universities. And if you meet Korean students, they'll raise their hands less in the classroom and they'll be less willing to confront the professor and say, no, I disagree with you. I have a different opinion. It's very different, but that's the Confucian, legacy or tradition we have to respect elders and to learn from your professors, and it's just a cultural difference. Yeah.
Would you consider Seoul to be an international city in the same way Paris is often called an international city?
I think it's trying to become one, and even without trying, it is in the process of becoming an international city. It's becoming more tourist friendly, more foreigner friendly. If you look at the road signs, if you look at also all the websites online, they now usually have an English, version. And more companies are coming here, more and more people are coming to live here. So I think it's on the right path. You have more exchange students. If you have more exchange students coming here, eventually some of them will stay here and maybe find a job here, or they'll come back to Korea at some point in their lives. So I think it's definitely going to become a more international city from now on. In Seoul, you also have some areas like Itaewon, which are very global with a lot of restaurants.
I was eating Ethiopian food there last night, in fact.
And Bulgarian food, it can be French food, pretty much anything. So it's a very, well, that place, Itaewon, is very international. But some other places are also becoming more international, and it's not rare to see a foreigner walk in the street. If you live Seoul, it can be a little bit different. Or if you go to a smaller city, maybe down in the south, maybe you'll see less foreigners. Right. But Seoul is the big, international hub of Korea. So, I think it's going to continue in that way. And for me, I think we will also get to see more mixed kids who are half Korean. We have a lot of mixed marriages taking place. So it's a big mix, and it's I think it's fun.
When you have French friends or family visit you, where do you take them here?
Where do I take them? Well, I take them first to Korean food. So I take them to like a traditional Korean restaurant where you can't really put your hands on the table because it's like packed with side dishes. Yes. So I definitely take them to one of those places. I try to take them also to Namsan Tower to have a view of the city. Right. So depending on the schedule, either at night or during the day. I try to take them to the markets. I think markets are a really excellent place if you want to grasp the culture, interact with the locals. Going to a market is really nice. So Namdaemun Market, or you can go to Dongdaemun Market at night if you like shopping. That's definitely somewhere I go. I also love the Han River banks. If you go there just to, ride a bicycle or just take a walk or maybe for a little jog. You can even go there at night. You can sit in the grass and even order food if you want.
I gotta try that.
So, so many places you can go to. I also like some of the more modern, trendy lounges you can find. And this is more maybe going to appeal to a younger crowd. Right. When I have, let's say, university friends coming over or French friends coming over, we just go out for a few drinks. They have to try soju as well.
Yes, have they never had soju?
Most of them never, of course. Okay. It's not a big thing in France. You're more into wine and beer and cocktails. True. And then maybe you can mix beer and soju as well. They call it somek here in Korea. So, just about that nightlife culture.
They always like it? Do they always come away pretty happy?
They love it. They love it. And they usually enjoy it a lot. Yeah.
Finally, do you think whether it's approaching Seoul when you're new to Seoul or approaching the Korean wave or any form of Korean culture when you're new to it, is there any specific thing, any special thing important to understand about Korea, the culture, the people that really helps you get into the city or get into the culture or get into anything that's just important to know that helps you engage with whatever form of Korean culture you happen to like or think you want to discover?
Well, as we said, when you want to learn about a new culture, the language will help. So I would say learning a few expressions, knowing a few words, and Koreans are really receptive to that little effort you make. So even if you go to a restaurant and you say 감사합니다, or you say I don't know, 안녕하세요 when you come in. And
잘하시네요.
Things like that. And if you smile and you make an effort, if you take the first step, Koreans will definitely, appreciate that. And they're willing to give more. They usually don't count. They have a lot of service, right? They give you free drinks and free food. And even sometimes you meet random people at the table next to you. And if they know that you're from this country, that country, and that you're here for the first time, maybe they'll just, invite you over to have a drink, or maybe they'll offer you some food even. So, that is very important, to be open-minded and to make that first little effort. To go towards them. I think that's very important. And then I don't know if it's as important, but respecting elders and bowing, the little things.
The two-handed. giving of the card, which I guess doesn't happen in France.
No, yeah, your business card you'll never give with two hands, and you don't necessarily always carry a business card anyways. Right. But here in Korea, it's always, about introducing yourself and who you are. Come to Korea and experience it for yourself. You'll probably make mistakes in the beginning, but that's part of the whole experience as well. And, Koreans are not going to hate you for that anyways.
Right.
So that's fine. Just if you have the opportunity, come over and try it for yourself. We have plenty of things to offer here. And, if you want to learn more, in the meantime, you can always listen to our radio program or watch my TV show. On the radio, it's very simple. You can download the application, Arirang
anywhere you can hear
application. You have audio on demand service. We also have the rerun, so it's called Catch the Wave on Arirang Radio. It's very simple, and we give information in English, so that's the most important thing, I guess, for your listeners. And we try to basically promote Korean culture, but not really I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just trying to tell you, how we live, what we do, and I try to answer your questions, basically.
I've been speaking here at Arirang with Adrien Lee. He is the host of two shows, Showbiz Korea and Catch the Wave, here on Arirang Radio and TV. Adrien, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Colin. It was great to have you here, and I hope your listeners got to learn more about me, but more importantly about Korean culture.
I have no doubt of that. This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chenupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Umberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennedy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manvir, Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.